Every claim tells a story, and some are stranger than fiction. Welcome to the F-Files. When claims get weird, we get to work.
Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about phantom billing, which includes scenarios like ghostly charges for tests that weren't run, equipment that was never delivered, and providers who might not even exist. These are indicators of phantom providers, and today they rise from the dead.
All right, so today I want to tell you a story about the Larsons, and they live in Illinois. So in the summer of 2024, Deborah Larson began noticing her explanation of benefits coming in with these really strange lab charges for diagnostic pathology, and she was getting these EOBs every single week for both her and her husband. And she knew they weren't accurate because they didn't match any of the lab tests that she was having, that she had had in the last several months leading up to that. And these EOBs showed 8 different labs, and she'd never heard of them. They had weird names like Safina Enterprises and Icon Events, so they didn't even sound like labs. And some weeks they would even receive FedEx boxes full of EOBs in the mail regarding these charges. So obviously they were unsettled by this, as you can imagine, and just thinking about the whole situation gives me heartburn. Honestly, just having to deal with that much junk mail. But also, they were concerned, are they going to be held accountable for these charges? So they made repeated calls to the insurance company to report the charges. And it got to the point where the insurance actually had to issue them new policy numbers. You would think that would put a stop to it, but it didn't. So those mysterious lab charges just kept rolling in. And they would follow up every now and then with the insurance to get a status of what was happening. But the insurance really couldn't provide an explanation. And that really bugged them. So one day they're watching the local news and they came across like a local news report, and it was called Phantom Billing Scam Targeting Illinois Residents. This news channel was NBC5 in Chicago, by the way. And they did a really excellent job on this report. This news channel was like basically saying this was happening to all kinds of people across the Chicago area. These folks were mostly getting explanation of benefits for COVID tests that they never received. So I actually watched that story, and it's kind of interesting because they zoomed in on an image of the explanation of benefit, and at first glance, it looked like the lab provider was LabCorp. But if you look really closely, it was spelled LabsCorp. So it was LABSCORP. Isn't that shady?
How sneaky.
Yeah, seriously.
I edit a lot in this position that I hold here. And I probably would have overlooked that, honestly.
I don't know if I would have picked up on it either, actually. I mean, it looked legit, and the guy actually thought it was legit. So NBC5 ended up reaching out to the registered agents of LabsCorp for comment. Obviously, they couldn't find them. So they ended up driving to the addresses listed on the NPI profile to try to get interviews. But the places were empty. They were just virtual offices. So basically they were just placeholders for mail. They checked with the neighbors, the neighboring businesses. Nobody could give them any explanation of that business ever existing in the first place. So the Larsons they wanted a piece of this action from NBC5 Chicago. So they actually called the news station, and NBC5 Chicago, like a boss, called every single lab on the Larsons' explanation of benefits. Not surprisingly, though, none of the numbers were in service. The buildings were empty, and some of the front doors even had like eviction notices taped to the front door, and they were old. There were multiple eviction notices there. Again, none of the neighbors could really say that a lab ever existed in that spot. So basically these labs just billed the insurance, collected $84,000 from the Larsons insurance, and then disappeared into thin air.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's a mess. And even though the Larsons never actually got any bills from the labs themselves, there were still a lot of headaches involved with sorting out this mess. And there are a lot of other reasons to be concerned about this scheme. I mean, what if they actually needed the services that were being billed and the insurance inadvertently denied those services because they thought they already received them? Maybe there was some liability as far as the deductible goes. Um, Maybe they were getting tagged with a diagnosis or pre-existing condition that they didn't actually have. And maybe they even had to pay, like some people might even have to pay attorney fees for getting the record corrected. So overall, like this is not a harmless scheme. I mean, even though we're not direct, the Larsons didn't directly pay for it, there were certainly costs involved. And I mean, it raises our insurance premiums also, like overall. So it's a pretty big deal. So yeah, this scheme generally originates from data breaches. So according to the HIPAA Journal, these data breaches have really taken off in the last decade, and 2023 was a record year. It had the most reported data breaches at 725, which affected 133 million records. And if you go over to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights website, you can see all the data breaches in the U.S. being investigated in the last 24 months. And almost all of them seem to be occurring through hacking, according to that data set.
That's crazy. I know I've received a couple of letters in the mail due to data breaches for healthcare providers where I've been seen. Luckily, most of them I wasn't seen like within the last 7 to 10 years on some of them that I've seen, but it's still kind of concerning when you think about it, how easily these companies are getting hacked. There's a lot of information that's in your medical record that you wouldn't even think ties to anything outside of your healthcare, but a lot of healthcare companies also include your social security number, your full date of birth, your most current address. So it's not a big leap to be concerned that if your health data gets breached, then your other personal data could potentially be breached as well, and that can cause issues for you with identity theft and things along that line as well.
That's a really excellent point, Daphne. This has the potential to have a ton of significant personal consequences, let alone the dollars lost by the insurance carrier. So yeah, this is a timely topic. As you guys know, Healthcare Fraud Shield is seeing this, across client data. We're trying to stay on top of it as best we can, and we really think everyone needs to be monitoring this very regularly.
Well, let's loop back. I have some comments and questions about the Larsons. First of all, how lucky that they ran across that report. I don't know about many other people, but I'm not frequenting the news sites anymore as often these days. So, just how lucky that they ran across that. And it just kind of speaks to being vigilant about what's happening around you, like maybe within your state, the confines of your state, or I mean, I guess nationally too, if the HHS OIG is involved in this kind of a thing. Just kudos to them for like being vigilant. And then also, they were using virtual offices. That's so creative and ingenious. I never would have come up with that. Like I see virtual offices all the time and I see the benefit that they could have, but having an address at a virtual office, because if you're just doing some research based off of the address online, like you're using a map thing and you're looking at the photos of the front of the building, like I would probably be like, yeah, okay, there's probably something there.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Honestly, you wouldn't know this unless you have to dig a little deeper. Now, luckily, we actually have alerts here at Healthcare Fraud Shield that will tell us if an address matches a virtual site. But otherwise, it takes a little bit extra legwork to get to the bottom of that. And you wouldn't know it right off the bat.
All right. So what is phantom billing? What could be considered being within the realm of phantom billing? One of the first things that comes to my forethought, Mandi, is billing for tests that were never performed or possibly DME equipment that was never delivered. We're talking about like those fake COVID tests that we're seeing, or we're talking about wrist braces, knee braces, and ankle braces all being billed for the same member on the same data service with a diagnosis code that probably doesn't back it up.
Yeah, or we could be talking about ghost patients. So patients who aren't real or patients who are deceased. Or, maybe there was a group number or something created for a patient that doesn't actually exist. Or maybe the patient's social security number, date of birth were, stolen in a data breach. And I will say recently, what I've been seeing a lot of, I don't know about you, but in the data, I've seen a lot of folks with Medicare supplement plans showing up as victims of this scheme. Have you seen that, Daphne?
I haven't really seen a differentiation between the types of plans, but I haven't really been honestly looking that closely at it. When I see
Okay.
something, I just call it out. Another thing that I see quite frequently is ghost provider IDs. So potentially somebody, in air quotes, borrowing a provider's ID and billing for things that the provider whose ID was stolen maybe didn't know about. And then, of course, the addresses. I just love it when you look up an address on a mapping system on the internet and it appears to be like, an abandoned cornfield with a creepy scarecrow in it, kind of a situation.
Or like a dilapidated wooden shack, slightly larger
Oh,
than an
yeah.
outhouse.
Yeah, with some graffiti on it.
Yeah.
Definitely
Uh,
gives spooky vibes.
um, so another thing we would see with phantom billing is mass billing for panels or DME. And the point with these phantom providers is expediency. So they're going to go ahead and submit a high volume of claims on 1 or 2 dates of service, collect their money, and then disappear. So the point is that they're unlikely to be too bold by billing something really expensive because they're trying to fly under the radar. So something like a tier 2 molecular pathology code would draw too much attention. It's not to say they haven't done that before. There was a big case back in 2022 where this happened with cancer and cardiovascular genetic tests, but that person got caught, and those sorts of things attract a lot of attention. So generally, you're going to see a high volume of claims for lower reimbursement services like COVID tests or DME that is exempt from prior authorization requirements, like items costing less than $50. So some examples of that sort of thing would be like urinary catheters or braces. And then finally, we are looking at providers who are often owned by a foreign entity. So with a little bit of investigation, you might find that these fake DME or lab companies were once real companies that got purchased by foreign entities. They exploit the credibility of that business they just purchased and they use it to launder money. So I don't feel comfortable calling out any specific nationality because there would be like regional enclaves all over the country. But HHS OIG issued a big press release back in June of this year. It was Operation Gold Rush, where they cited ties to Pakistan, for example.
So I'm just curious about these shell entities. I'm wondering if a lot of times they're companies that are just starting out or established, and then a bigger company or corporation or entity, I suppose, comes and buys them out. And then from there, they start to do the troublesome billing. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah, I think it could be a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes it's a established DME company that may be in financial trouble, so they're, looking for some help there. Or it could just be like a brand new company that's just getting gobbled up like Pac-Man by this bigger entity.
Okay, that makes sense. So I wonder, how would you research that to determine if that's something that's going on? Are we going to look for like a high volume of lower revenue inducing companies and then see if they all have like a similar registered agent?
I mean, that's how I would do it. I always just I check the registered agent and the address. You know, a lot of times they'll have the same. A lot of times the registered agent will actually be some attorney or firm. But
Oh,
but
yeah.
you'll notice like they all share the same address.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe there's like a similar name but a variation on that name. Like maybe there's a middle initial sometimes, and then other times there's not. So yeah, I would start there.
Okay. That's interesting. Interesting to think about and kind of try to picture how that web can be woven. I've seen sometimes where in the data for specific providers, they go long stretches without billing. Like you'll see them pop up for maybe in 1 year for 2020. We'll just throw this out as an example. In 2022, they were emerging in January, for instance, and then they had a huge spike in February, and then nothing from March 2022 all the way to like, I don't know, July 2024, and then a huge spike again. So, what's your thoughts on something like that occurring? Do you think it's the same thing? Do you think they're just kind of recycling the scheme?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they have their like a spreadsheet and a schedule. Let's bill this payer on this day and this payer on this day. And just a way to like kind of spread it out to try not to draw attention to themselves. I mean, that's just my theory of the case. I honestly don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think that's probably pretty valid, and it's just dawning on me like how disorganized my life is at this point because I don't have a calendar telling me when I'm going to be doing specific things. I just got to kind of keep it all in my head.
Yeah, I
But,
mean, they seem pretty sophisticated. So my guess is they've
yeah,
got some pretty organized people behind this.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess if my job was to do that, I probably would be a little bit better at tracking
You'd be motivated by like fear of arrest.
or dollar signs.
Yeah, or that.
Okay, so how do you data mine for phantom providers? What kind of stuff are you looking for? I've compiled a small little list of the things that I look for. And just to be clear, this is not all encompassing. These are just five or so things that I look at when I'm doing some casual data mining. The first thing I look at is when was the MPI for the provider enumerated? Is it recently, like within the last 6 months? I did notice in some of my research that sometimes providers will go through the trouble of becoming licensed in a state, um, you know, going through the appropriate loopholes, getting the appropriate certifications necessary to establish themselves. Then they'll bill for the services, receive that fat paycheck, and then ride off into the sunset. Again, just like Mandy said, never to be seen or heard from again. That's not uncommon. A lot of times when I'm data mining for phantom providers, I'll see it'll kind of just be like a little blip on the radar. They'll have a paid claims beginning in maybe January. They'll have a huge spike in February, and then when you get to March, there's nothing again. To me, that indicates that they just billed for as much as they could as quickly as they could and rode off into the sunset. And honestly, like a lot of what I see is like maybe around $25,000 worth of services billed. And I think when they're staying down that low, it's because they're trying to fly under the radar and not
Mm-hmm.
be spotted.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to look at. But in the bigger picture, if they're billing $25,000 to one insurance company, they're probably doing it for multiple other insurance companies. So this could be a huge multi-million dollar issue. It just might not impact one insurance company specifically for that dollar figure. The next thing I look for is what's being billed. Are multiple members being billed for the same lab test or the same orthotics for each member? If that's the case, that's kind of questionable in my opinion, because how many people need, a wrist brace, a back brace, and an ankle brace, all on the same date of service? At what point does it become questionable?
Sorry, I was just thinking. I was just thinking about like I did have some injuries where I like broke like the right half, every bone on the right half of my body. So it was like maybe I can think of an example, but I know that's not a common thing. So
Well, I was also very accident prone when I was younger, but I didn't get a lot of DME products. So I think that there's some validity if you're seeing, upwards of 20, 25 members getting the same DME products, and also if they have the same exact diagnosis for all three, for instance, of those orthotics,
yeah.
that's kind of questionable too. Why do you need a back brace for ankle pain? If they're being billed for the same lab test, like, does everybody have the same, not otherwise specified or unspecified diagnosis code, or is it
That's
something generic, like suspected exposure to bacterial or viral communicable diseases? That's questionable for me.
Yeah, I love those when you see a provider who they'll see somebody, they'll bill for like repeated visits, but it's the diagnosis never gets like refined. It's always a very vague, like unspecified diagnosis. I mean, that's a dead giveaway to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and as coders, we know it should be billed to the highest specificity code available at the time. A lot of times, though, when I'm looking at a legit lab, sometimes I can tell it's legit because they're billing based off of the symptoms instead of an actual diagnosis, before they get the testing done.
Mm,
And to me, that says, hey, I'm a real lab. I don't know what the problem is yet, but we're trying to figure it out.
mm. That's a really good point, Daphne. You're so smart.
Oh, thank you. Tell my husband. Okay, the next thing I like to do is check the locality of the member to the provider who's billing the service. Is the provider in Louisiana, but the member's in Washington or California? That's kind of suspicious to me. I was going to say sussy. I don't know if that's a politically correct terminology anymore, but it's suspicious, in my opinion, because it's more likely that if a member's being sent to a lab, it's going to be a more local lab. A doctor's not going to say, here, you live in Washington, I'm going to send you to a lab that's clear over in Louisiana. It's possible that the samples that are received at the lab are being sent to Louisiana, but it's more likely that there's going to be a lab that's a little bit closer than Louisiana to run those tests. Something that Mandi pointed out to me earlier this month is that we're seeing a lot of these suspicious DME companies and labs with issues with potential phantom providers in California, Florida, and Texas. I don't know if there's some reason why they're popping up more there. It might be like lack of guidelines or lack of restrictions that could be fueling the fire for those particular areas. That's not to say that those are the only places we're seeing. It's just that that's more frequent and the things that we're currently looking at.
They're also the biggest states, so
Oh yeah, good point.
proportionally, I
I didn't even
guess
think
it would
about
make
that.
sense.
Yes,
But
that
it
does
could also
make a
be
lot of sense.
it's maybe some of the rules around like how businesses are set up. And I mean, this gets into legal stuff that's way in over our head.
It's easier to create a business in some states that have more lax guidelines and restrictions for creating a business in those
Yes.
states. Okay, so the next thing I like to look at is the address of the provider. I will say this 100 times over. One of my favorite things to do, and probably because I'm nosy, I love to get an address, look it up on an online map that provides a street view of the building or a picture of the front of the provider's office. A lot of times you'll find some suspicious things, like maybe that address is a postal office store. Maybe it's a dilapidated building with the graffiti that Mandy and I were talking about earlier, or maybe it's that empty cornfield with the creepy scarecrow. If that's what you're seeing when you hop on that online map, it's a pretty good indicator that you might have a phantom provider on your hands.
Higher than 50% chance for sure.
Okay, good. I'm glad that that stat came about. Okay, so the other thing that I like to do is check for referring or ordering physicians. Are there any at all? Is there one or a few providers that have tons of claims and members? If that's the case, you might have a kickback situation, but it could also be a phantom situation too. Some DME items don't require an order from a medical provider. Luckily, Medicare maintains a list of DME items that require face-to-face visits and a written order prior to the member receiving that piece of DME. So definitely reference that. If you're seeing a lot of claims with no provider, that could be, a significant issue. And then just as kind of like a little bonus thing that I like to look at is what's the specialty of the provider? If you have a single provider who's referring a lot of members. One of the things that I've seen is why would an OBGYN be referring members for an ankle brace? That doesn't seem to like line up with the type of care that an OBGYN would be offering to a member. So that's just, a little bonus, something to look for. Some other pointers that maybe aren't necessarily like a telltale sign of a phantom provider, but are definitely a little bit suspicious and could indicate that you might need to dig a little bit. The provider has a weird or funny sounding name. This could indicate a name that was machine generated. A good practice, if you find a provider's name that sounds a little bit off, is to check the Secretary of State website to see if the authorized official for this particular provider is also an authorized official for other named entities. If they are, there's a chance that you might have more than just one phantom provider on your hands. Yeah, another thing you could take a look at is the provider's website, if they have one. Some providers don't even have websites, and to me, that's almost more of a red flag than if they did.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, at least if they've taken the time to put up a website, they get extra points in the possibly legit column.
Yeah, a little street cred, if you will. So when I'm looking at these websites, is there anything off about it? Spelling, grammar, contact information? Is the state or other information that you could find under the MPI information not lining up with where these members are? Those are things to look at. Another thing I've had recently, I was looking at a provider online. It was a lab, a reported lab. A sussy lab. I clicked on some of the tiles that they had. When you click on a tile and it gives you information about the subject that you're clicking on. Mm-hmm. I clicked on that tab and it took me to information about car repairs.
What?
I don't know about you, but when I'm looking at like COVID tests, I don't necessarily expect to see information about car repairs or where to send your customers for car repairs.
I think that's a new one. I've never.
Yeah.
I've never.
Yeah,
seen
it's
that.
A real thing. I saw it happen in front of my eyes. So
I believe you. I mean,
definitely keep an eye out for that. And then the last thing that I see oftentimes that, could be a potential red flag is look at the online reviews for the providers, if there are any. A lot of times, like you said, these phantom labs or DME companies are just a short little blip in time, like 3 months for the whole scheme to take place and then just disappear, which doesn't offer a lot of time for people to make reviews. But every once in a while, you'll get lucky and you'll see see some information that might indicate that you should probably do some deeper digging.
I think these are really excellent pointers to just kind of keep in the back of your minds when you're data mining. 9 out of 10 chances there's a phantom lab billing, and you're probably missing it, or you're not seeing it before, in time. Really good information, Daphne. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to add that the Healthcare Fraud Shield platform has a lot of cool resources to alert clients to suspect phantom providers. We have a lot of alerts, like I said, one I referenced for virtual offices, but there are many more. The platform also is going to pull in a lot of external data, like whether or not a lab or a DME company has a news story published about them, or maybe even whether the DME company is billing on someone who might actually be deceased. Also, our clients can gain a lot of insights on phantom providers by using our shared analytics tool. It's crucial to stay on top of this because these providers are coming and going before you even realize that they're there, and then new ones are popping up in their place like a game of whack-a-mole. If you don't have access to our tools, try flagging the first claim from a non-par DME or lab provider from states like Florida, California, or Texas. Put that provider on prepay, look at the documentation, see if it looks legit, and then decide if you're going to pay going forward. If you don't have access to shared analytics, engage in some sort of information sharing consortium like SIUs through NHCAA. Maybe think about scheduling some queries for newly enumerated NPIs with DME or lab taxonomies. Maybe you could do this every month or so, and that way you can catch them before the exposure actually gets high. But next time, we're going to keep the creepy vibe going by talking about services and vans. So stay tuned for more info on that topic. And in the meantime, come say hi to us at the NHCAA Annual Training Conference, which is happening in Nashville, November 18th to the 21st. Our crew is going to be in booth 805. And then check out our webinar on December 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, hosted by our very own Karen Weintraub. It's titled Double Trouble, Exploring Different Double Billing Themes. And this webinar is actually approved for 1 CEU by AAPC, so don't miss it. And then sign up for our newsletter where we have blogs on lots of different schemes and FWAE topics. So you can find that on www.hcfraudshield.com. We do have a really good article. The most recent one was on remote patient monitoring. And that concludes episode 1. Got a scheme we should cover? Send it our way and stay tuned for the next chapter of the F-Files. Everything that has been discussed in this podcast is based on our day-to-day experiences.
Any opinions stated by myself, Mandi, or any guests during the podcast are not necessarily representative of the opinions or views of Healthcare Fraud Shield.